You're listening to Puzzle Bits of Rubber from Bolton University.
So the notes that we were listening through the conversation, we were editing it up, and the question that I think we have to ask ourselves honestly is, what does digital sculpting have to do with battling with bits of rubber? Because we keep cropping up with this, but I think it's one of those we're going to have to accept that it's inescapable fact of life is that the digital stuff is making such a big impact on practical effects in a good way.
Yeah, I think digital and practical are going to be integrated in such a way in the not too distant future. I think in no time it's just going to be the way it is. Yeah. And it's already showing up that way. With Bill Corso's company, he's got a digital makeup group is the name of that company. Masters Effects has digital in-house now. ADI.
Sure.
Rick Baker is becoming quite the digital guru in his, can't say retirement because he's probably as busy as he's ever been, but doing his own stuff, and digital has become a huge part of that. I mean, ZBrush is going to be as much a part of makeup effects educational programs as teaching clay sculpting and mold making stuff. I think it's inevitable.
I think so. It's inevitable. But what I found interesting as well is the amount of places that have traditionally taught makeup and continue to do so don't really have like a backlog of digital education they can lean on to bring into their curriculum, because I mean there are a few places I know, like obviously Bolton are big into this and they've been doing it for a while. University of Wolverhampton as well, they have a great Instagram page where they're posting things.
And Falmouth is doing it.
Yes, Falmouth.
Brad Greenwood comes in from a digital, I don't say his background, but he is as much a digital guy as he is a practical guy, I think.
And it's interesting because there are sort of fundamental things that, like, for example, when we were doing that makeup together, there were certain things I just didn't have time to figure out. Like, we've got our scan, and it was a great scan, but there were holes in it. And I'm like, I don't know how to fill those holes. You know what I mean? So it's like that's a fundamental thing, but it's not necessarily something a sculptor would know about, because they're not really worried about scale and things like that. So it's a weird, do you know what I mean? It's like when you have a life cast that you've taken, you got to clean it up. You clean away, you shave off the eyebrows and all that kind of stuff, and you shave back the hair, and that's a sort of a sculptural thing, but it's not really a sculptor's job. It normally happens in the mold room. Do you know what I mean? So there's these sort of weird hybrid jobs that have traditionally been plastering or mold making or working with clay that are going to be done digitally now, and the digital people haven't necessarily had to clean up data of scan stuff really, or if they did, that was a separate department. It wasn't the person that was going to be sculpting.
And who knows, it may evolve into that anyway, that it becomes that, in animation you have people who are doing cleanup, basically going from when the drawn images to inking stages. There's a lot of cleanup that has to, that's why you look at the number of people working on an animated feature, because there's an incredible amount of work that goes into doing that kind of stuff, and it may work out that it happens in our field as well, that somebody will sculpt something in ZBrush, or they'll take a digital scan in, and somebody who's specializing in cleaning up those scans does that and isn't actually doing the sculpting per se, adding skin texture and whatnot. Is their job is cleaning up holes in a scan.
Which doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, if you pardon the expression. But
again, some people might dig that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because it just occurs to me like I found, like, there's a job I'm doing at the moment where I'm using ZBrush to do something quite specific, and it's sort of sculptural, but not in the sense that it's a sculptor's problem. I'm just going to achieve the things I need sculpturally, because otherwise, it's not an easily repeatable or transferable process. Can't talk about it because ND data, but it's one of those things where it's like, so I'm going to try this. And so I've looked at like painting tutorials, and I've looked at various other bits and bobs, and I piece together what I think I need to do, and then I discover a new thing in ZBrush that I didn't know. Like today I found about target morph. I learned about what that was, and I thought, oh, that's sort of what I want to do, but not really. And then working in layers, and like, oh, you can paint in layers. That's handy. So I'm going to use...
Are you watching tutorials?
I am watching tutorials, but only very short ones, because what I find I'm doing is I'm piecing together odd things that are not necessarily related in order to achieve what I need to do, which is quite weird, but I just happen to be using ZBrush to do it. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, it's very hard, and I found that it's difficult to know how to articulate the question. And I've had I remember similar things when I started doing, like when I was trying to sell the e-course, on my website, like 12 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever I started doing that. And there was a guy that knew about like online shops, and I was going to get him to help me on my website. He had no idea about how to do downloadable content, because at the time it wasn't that big a thing. And so although he knew how to sell t-shirts online, he didn't know about how to automate digital downloads and stuff. And it's like, obviously now that's commonplace, and it's built into things like Squarespace or Wix websites. You can buy those as things, but it's just like, but that's because lots of people are doing it. But there was a time, and so I feel we're sort of on the outlier bit now, where we're trying to sort of figure out how to do something digitally that would otherwise always have been done practically. And it's almost like the digital sculptors are not necessarily much use, because they know about sculpting, but none of them have had to make a specific size shell that had to fit on a person, because that was always the mold maker's job. Do you know what I mean? So it's quite an interesting one. So I'm enjoying that process. It feels a little bit like the Wild West, and then you sort of find something. You find a tutorial that's sort of close, and then you kind of go, this is like the only one that I can find on this. But surely,
it's
how,
because it comes back to, how important experimentation and just trying things out is to working in our business.
Yeah.
That everything we do originally started out as somebody thinking, what if I tried this? And it either works or it doesn't, and you try something else. And
yes, and you
find that thing that does exactly what you need it to do, and then you find something else that augments that, and presto, you've got a whole new workflow for creating something.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's because I think there's a lot of sort of a desire to kind of just find a pre-existing process and learn that process, whereas a lot of this is kind of just figuring shit out and piecing stuff together. And there are big chunks of time where you kind of feel like you're in the wilderness and you're not really getting anywhere particularly, but you strangely sort of led on continually. Like ZBrush, like literally in the last couple of years I've started to be able to use it, but I've had it for about 10-12 years. I bought my copy like 10-12 years ago. It's taken me that I've chipped away a little bit at a time, then I get scared and I leave it for 6 months, and the distance between me leaving it after being frightened is shortening to like a few hours now. So now I can actually come back.
Yeah, I was terrified when I first started working with it, and to the point where I try a few things and just get frustrated. Things now that used to cause lots of profanity, I now know how to, because when something would lock up on the page, and it's like, how the hell do I get rid of this?
Yeah.
And there's some simple control in, boom, clears it.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, because it's weird, isn't it? And you have to kind of
simple things.
Yeah, and one thing I found,
but there's nowhere you can look anywhere to find that.
No.
On a menu that says how to clear something that's frozen on your screen.
Yeah.
Press this button.
Yeah, it's weird because there's so many weird artifacts and things that happen that I don't know how to describe, and so often it'll be like, well, I'm just going to fire up Camtasia and then record what I'm doing, and then point out, do you see that thing there? Why is that happening, and how do I stop it? So I can send that to someone that I know and hassle them with, a 5-minute video because there's no other way of explaining it. But anyway, it's getting there, I think. But it made me realise that there's a lot of ground to be made up, and there's a few people we want to talk to. I'd love to chat to somebody from Wolverhampton. We have to get in touch with them, and there's a really cool company called Backface Studios, a guy called Tim Millwood there, who I've been put in touch with through some folks at Bolton. So I'd love to get in touch with him because they obviously do a lot of scanning and a lot of digital stuff, and they're very, very good people to talk to, and I think they would be very good at explaining in a way that I just wouldn't be able to do it succinctly. how scanning is working and what it can do for people and all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of this is just like what I think.
Thank goodness for people like that, and for people like Maddie Spencer, who has made ZBrush so less formidable.
Yeah.
And the Boltons, we got so much info in Bolton that we've got to do 2 episodes for it.
Yes, we got 2. So this is just part 1 where we're talking about visual effects and practical effects and how they work together. And there was a lot of good information there that Richard, who teaches the visual effects side of things, is there. Because there's Rick and there's Richard, and so that they're both there. So it's quite confusing. So you have to call one Richard, one Richard, and one Rick. But it is interesting to see how they work together, and that's what I really liked about Bolton, is that they make those things work together. And Richard's particularly good at dismantling my fear of the separation between the two, and he always brings it back to, how important that practical information is and how much that hands-on information is. And just because you don't know how to code or you don't know how to do this it doesn't matter. It's still what you can do is still relevant.
That's where it all originated.
Yes, but it's still relevant.
It started out as practical, tangible, physical things that digital it's sort of crept in, like a water leak.
Yeah.
Until boom, it was this thing, and now it's this thing. And there's still a gray area. I remember we were talking about, how I noticed when I made the switch from visual effects to practical effects, that the practical people don't have any secrets. They're not afraid to share their hard work with other people. Obviously everyone would prefer you to get in the trenches and get your hands dirty and try to figure things out yourself, and then ask for help if you can't. But there are no secrets in our business, and the visual effects people are not as forthcoming with their secrets as the practical people. And as Richard pointed out correctly, I think a lot of that has to do with workflow. That it's not going to be the same. The pipelines are different from studio to studio.
Yes.
Though the steps you have to go through from A to Z are the same. There are going to be nuances that make it different, so that sharing secrets from one shop's figuring out how to do something might not work in another shop's pipeline.
Yeah.
The same way.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, and I think because obviously where we're coming at it from, the pipeline is quite a short one, because we don't slot into a visual effects arena necessarily, although obviously things you could do practically could go out, filter out into the digital, the visual effects field. But I'm just stoked that I'm using ZBrush and printing to do things that I would otherwise be doing practically more accurately and more efficiently. Even this print, it's taking 100 hours possibly. It's like 4 whole days to print.
Yeah.
Or more than that, But the point is, I'm
think
doing
of all
other
the
things.
You can get done other things.
Exactly, I'm doing other things. I've got another printer printing something else, and I'm sculpting up something else at the same time, and then tidying up my workshop and doing my taxes, and all this is happening whilst that print is happening. So it's not like I'm sitting there drumming my fingers, and that whole roll of filament I think was like 50 quid. And it's a 3 kilo roll, and I've used probably a kilo on this head, and it's taken that long.
Yeah, it comes back down to our discussion about what's your time worth.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite amazing that you can do it. Obviously, you need the time to build that in, but printers will get quicker over time, or you might even outsource the actual printing to a company that do the printing, but you still need to be able to prepare the object for printing, and so to be familiar with it is no bad thing. Just like being able to ride a horse 300 years ago. I mean, it just makes sense. If that's how you get around and you can't do that, you're at a disadvantage. So there we go. I'm excited about this one. It's very good. But there are those guilty benefits of using digital tools, especially for us practical people, but, or impractical if you're not going to use it, because it is eminently sensible.
Well, it's all gonna eventually. It will all be moot. It will all blend into one thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. that'll be one of those things. So anyway, we're waffling on.
And I hope I have a feeling it's going to happen pretty quickly.
Yes, the landscape's changed
We'll
fast.
be able to see it.
Yeah.
Say, we saw this coming.
Well, I think we should let Bolton explain all this much better. So let's go over to our first episode, or first part 1 of episodes with Bolton.
So the acoustics are a little bit different, so I'm going to try and speak loudly and clearly to compensate for the echoey room, because normally I have a microphone right here. So I'm going to have to do what I hate doing, which is speaking very loudly. So I've quietly spoken, which is cool.
Well, the fan just went off, so it'll be a little easier.
I remember the AC.
Thank you. It's very
It's going to get real warm in here.
So just wake me up when I fall
I
asleep.
remember that last year.
I think it automatically turns on after a few
I
minutes.
thought you meant you
so
smelled last year.
it might-
Probably
So here we are in
same,
Bolton.
Yes, we're in Bolton, and we've had a good time, actually. It's been
Stop
really good
number
fun.
3 on
Yeah.
my UK tour this year, starting off in Falmouth last week, then Coventry over the weekend for the prosthetics event, and now up in sunny Bolton
Definitely not.
That's where you
for a
get,
2-day
yeah.
stint with the special effects and makeup effects and visual effects programs. And I don't know about you, Stu, but I'm having a great time.
No, I'm having a great time. It's not going to be much warmer in Guildford, to be honest with you, man. So just brace yourself for that. It's gonna be-
Sorry, I brought warm clothes.
Yeah. So the reason we wanted to have a chat was that we wanted to talk about a few things that we saw crop up. I think there was when we were speaking to Jake Garber, there were some very good questions that kind of started us rolling, talking about stuff. And I know things change over time, and different courses and different things they bring different things out in people, and industries are different. And one of the questions that was asked was about confidence, and we were talking to Jake Garber a lot about being on set and supervising stuff on set. Because when you go to makeup school, you learn the process of how to make things, but then when they're made, they go on set. Now it's a completely different world. Now you might have 50 people in makeup, and suddenly one of the examples I brought up, because I've seen it, is you've got a group of people, that 50 people in makeup, and like the 5 at the front are really good detailed makeups because they're the close-up, they're the ones that have rehearsed and practiced. Then there's 10 behind that because they're further away from the camera, so there's more of them, but they're smaller in frame, so they can afford to be slightly less complicated makeups because it's cheaper to do that. And then you go to the deep background, and they might be masks or they might be quick paint jobs or whatever. But then suddenly...
Not designed to be seen.
Not designed to be seen. And then suddenly someone has a good idea to stick a Steadicam in there and just run around the backs of everyone who's at the back. And now things that were never meant to be seen close up are seen close up. So a set supervisor is someone who goes, no, or you can do that, but it's going to cost you a fortune to fix it in post. And have you checked if that's okay? Because I know that happens a lot where people just sort of push things to the back, and then suddenly filming's done, principal photography is done, and then it's left to the visual effects department to pick up the pieces.
It can be terrifying for the visual effects departments, that
And that's not good.
Yeah, and unrewarding as well, because it's not the work that they're passionate they signed up for, if you get what I mean. It's sort of like almost an afterthought, which isn't the perfect workflow. There's more efficient ways of doing it, which I think bring the best out of each area of film effects, and that's important to try and maintain wherever possible.
Yeah. So we have those two distinct things that I think we wanted to talk about. One was confidence and how you take the things you know and then make them work in industry, because you've got obviously a workplace that you're taking part in, and like Jake, for example, is a good example of someone who's quite tall. He's a big guy. He's got quite a deep voice. I know he was saying because of the smoke effects
But
that he was.
he does have deep
but
voice
he has a presence on set, which typically your set supervisor will. And not everyone can do that. I'm not set supervisor material at all. But if I see something, I'll mention it to the set supervisor because there's a hierarchy in place. So just generally talking about the confidence, and I thought you guys might.
Yeah, well,
be
what
a
goes
good
in
team.
tandem with the self-confidence is standing up for yourself.
Yeah.
Being able to, and you have that right.
Yeah.
Don't let people walk all over you, particularly if you not speaking up in the moment about a camera not being in a place where it really shouldn't be, and it's showing non-hero makeup in a hero shot.
Sure.
That's going to wind up costing production a lot of money. If
Like-
it slips by and nobody says anything about
Yes.
it, the shot winds up being unusable, or they have to reshoot it, which
Yes.
either way is going to be an expensive mistake.
It's expensive, but it might make you look bad if they think you did that bad makeup. So you need to kind of note as you go along in your call sheet what was done, so that you know that's an example.
And also,
when,
if you knew it was happening and didn't say or do anything about it.
yeah, but you met that. This is where the confidence things come. That you may not feel like you do, because you just find yourself on set and you're not necessarily. That's why you'd have a set supervisor though, as a go-between.
Because there's a hierarchy you need to follow. You don't want to step on people's toes, because even though you're doing the right thing, it could wind up costing you your job.
Yeah, but so you got the confidence thing, but that was the question they asked. A much broader thing was, generally speaking, like if you don't feel confident, like you might be creative, maybe very capable, but you don't feel confident, or you feel reluctant to kind of put yourself out there. So I think that would be a good discussion to have with people who are in the process of learning, who may feel in that place, right? So it's like, how do you do it? What can you do practically to accumulate confidence? Where does that come from? Because obviously over time you get more confident as you get older, but the stepping stones, and I guess the best way to do that, maybe think of things that you've done where your confidence kind of crept in. And the other thing we wanted to talk about, because Richard's here, was to talk about how the visual effects stuff combines with practical stuff. Because I've seen a lot of makeup schools that don't know anything about visual effects because they're very invested with makeup. We were talking about this in the ZBrush chat this morning, how like if you wanted to know how to do a nose or a wig or a pair of ears or something, there's lots of examples that you can draw on from 50, 60, 100 years worth of experience, and lots of different ways that can be done. Whereas if you're saying, I want to do this particular thing and I've got to do it in ZBrush, and I have to try and make a thing because I'm going to print it and I'm going to mold it, that's a very weird thing that you wouldn't have done 10 years ago. But it's quite a new thing. So there's not a lot of people that know extensively lots of ways to do that. There might be someone that's figured it out, but they're not necessarily going to tell you, or there's not a lot of information about it. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag. So there's quite a dip, a mixture of how visual effects is visual effects and practical, and they're sort of starting to cross over more.
Thankfully,
because now you can print stuff.
Yeah, I spent over a decade as a visual effects animator before switching into the practical world. We've had this conversation before, and what I have found, how the visual effects world has differed from my perception, being in both, from the practical effects world, is that the visual effects community is not as willing to share how they got from point A to point B as the makeup effects folks are, largely in part due to Dick Smith, who never believed in secrets. Visual effects expended a lot of sweat and effort to figure these things out, and they're not about to just give that away. I've found them to be very protective of their work, so different shops wind up reinventing the wheel from show to show, because they haven't been willing to share those experiences and their pain to gain that experience and those solutions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you seen that to be the case in any way?
It's a combination. There is definitely a factor of that going on, and here at the university we try and sort of make it a space where knowledge can move between any area.
I think in an educational environment, yes, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the other problem you have in the larger commercial VFX houses is that their pipelines, the way they work, are customized. So they're completely developed by an R&D team that invest hours in writing something to work in a particular way. That's often governed by a supervisor for that show. And they think this is the best way that this can work, and then those tools will stay with that company. So the way that they do hair, they might have a system that's unique that you would never know anywhere else. Like if you join that company, they would understand that you could not do a hair groom simulation using their software because you'd have never met it before. Yeah. So you have to take the skills that you've got, that you've proven on your show reel and your application, and reinvent yourself in line with the way that company works. So there's barriers to knowledge on both those fronts. They're very protective of that knowledge, and you can't just pick up someone else's piece of software because it's different to the way that you work. But when you have hundreds of artists working on these shows, these pipelines make incredible efficiencies. So when everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, it works amazingly. But then when you change shows or when there's a turnover, that can then be a barrier, like you're saying, where there's that protectiveness of knowledge or that sort of incompatibility of knowledge, which makes the process less efficient. Like,
Right.
if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
it's quite strange in VFX that two companies can be doing almost exactly the same thing on the same show, but they have different pipelines. The way their data is moving through that show is different, and it's not necessarily compatible.
And that fits perfectly in line with kind of my mantra. There's at least a half dozen ways to do everything.
Sure, but when you've got one system working together to produce something, they need to be kind of, that one thing. That's interesting. And that's not necessarily something that practical people would know about if they're not involved in the visual effects, which is why I think what you do here is quite important. Because you're so close to each other, you can say that to people who are making things.
Yeah.
It's not a completely unfound thing. Whereas I know of makeup schools I've taught at where there's none of that, but they'll know about, Marcel waves and various other intricate makeup things, which is great. But also it's like, but what if you're going to do hair in, digitally? Is there a problem? And you could talk to someone here about that.
Yes,
which is great.
I think that's why so many of the staff that have joined here have stayed here and flourished here, if that makes sense, is because we all believe in what each other does, and we just learn so much from it. Like, I just came into this sort of community only really understanding VFX, and I'd been on set a handful of times for much smaller productions than some of these guys, and it was a great experience, but I learned so much when I came here. So some people with education, they sort of feel that if you come in as an academic, it's because you couldn't survive in the real world. When you come into this environment, that's where a lot of my learning started to expand in directions that it hadn't in industry. And sometimes in industry you can get pigeonholed because you're so good at something, and that's that. Okay, we just want you for that. Let's just repeat doing it, knocking it out again. And here you can move around, you can change, and you can share, which we find absolutely fantastic. And it does mean that our students that are doing VFX are very aware of the practical elements. We're doing a project with a light cinema at the moment where we're digitally producing visualizations for spaces that the model makers will then take the signed off plans for and make the models so those spaces become real, if that makes sense. So, very similar to a set workflow, but in actually a slightly different industry.
Well, that was my impression just walking in this building. This has much more a working studio feel than an educational environment to me.
Yeah, very industrial. Those workshop areas are just great. If you could draw up a workshop that's perfect.
So that makes me think that as a university, this place has got it going on compared to other schools, at least schools in the States that are attempting to do the same things. This has got a much more professional feel than anything I've experienced, and more so than the schools where I've spent a good deal of time teaching.
We've got a very lucky blend. We're a small university by UK standards, and that makes us flexible. It makes us adaptable. We have a senior management team that ultimately believe in what we're doing, and they see us as one of the selling points of the university, so they invest in us. And we have a whole range of staff, many of which have come from industry, and the rest have come from good academic backgrounds, which means that fusion between the two has got what we need as far as sort of getting people to the level academically and with the industrial skills as well. So it is like a happy marriage of things, which I think is quite hard in institutes as bureaucratic as universities. It's quite hard to invent. We're quite lucky. We started small, we grew this way, and that's been the culture all the way through. If I went into another university and had to change what was there, I think there'd be much more resistance. Practical courses are in different departments to digital courses. They have different line managers, they have different budgets, they have, there's all these barriers that, they seem sort of, not that important, but when you're on the ground working in it, it blocks it and it tires you out.
Are you guys working with any proprietary software that the program has developed, or are you working with commercial packages like 3D Studio Max, Maya, Softimage,
Maya is the backbone of everything we do. And then we reach out into specialist packages for software that is better for those areas. So sculpting is ZBrush, compositing is Nuke, but everything is going back and then normally coming back into Maya in some way, and that's the way everything goes through. So we stay very much in line with what industry is recommending. We have industry advisory boards that set projects and feed back on what they are doing and what they're looking for skills in, and we adapt the course that way. Again, we're small enough to be flexible like that. You know, we can move the course content to react to a very, very fast changing industry across all sides. So we're lucky that way, and with the staff staying on top of things and sometimes exhaustively
Yeah,
going
because
out
the software changes in some cases weekly.
And we do have to ask for, it's about probably 7 years ago now, but I wrote a series of ZBrush lectures, 10 lectures that I released and became out of date in 3 weeks. And I had to rewrite them because the way that you did that with the next ZBrush version changed. Like,
2021 has been through 7 updates in 3 months.
Yeah.
Which is, it's good they've got their finger on the pulse, but,
Sometimes
please catch up.
Well, it's a very interesting point. Like, if we want to talk about that in industry, people will version freeze. So they will say, this project starts in this version, it stays in this version. We do not move out of
We
this
know
version.
it and we can work with
We
it.
know it,
quickly,
we can work with it, all our software works with it. Because
And some of them are significant changes that you try to use something in a new update that it's not backward compatible.
Exactly. ZBrush notorious for it. So sometimes you get midway through a project, update, wonderful. Like, click on the button and then nothing works. And it's terrifying. So, it is standard practice in the VFX industry to sign off a version of software for a project, and you don't change. So there are, Maya 2022 is out, but DNEG and some of the really big houses in London are working in Maya 2018 predominantly, because that has been, you've had service updates, you've had, sort of bug fixes again and again and again, and that is now bulletproof, that software. And what you can do in the latest piece of software versus 2018 is there's some nice touches, there's some nice little bells and whistles and things. There's nothing earth-shattering. Do you get what I mean? Like, if you're a good artist, that's going to come through whichever software you're using, and you'll find all these arguments online on what's better, Max, Maya,
Well, that's a great point that you just made. It doesn't matter what version that you're using. Ultimately, it's just a tool.
Your problem solving,
it's
your creativity.
It's the operator, not the software.
Absolutely.
The software will help to a certain degree, but if you have no creativity and very little imagination, it doesn't matter how phenomenal the software is and what it's capable of doing.
Now, the exception to that is when you have very large groups of artists working together, because some of the pieces of software, like Maya, have an engine which is very, very customizable. So the internal workings are exposable to code. You can take it and you can really make it do what you need it to do. Something like an open source piece of software like Blender, absolutely amazing package. Equally as good at producing things as an individual as Maya, but as a team collaborating, much harder to get that efficiency out of it, if that makes sense. And that is the only reason, really, why software like Blender isn't taking over at a top industry level. Like, it's just the beating heart of Maya is built so well for these large companies to maximize all of their R&Ders in it, all of their histories in it. It might one day change, but I can't see it changing anytime soon. So that's why we teach that software here. But do I have a software preference? No, not really. And we try and teach to be like software agnostic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, oftentimes, they're going to have to learn something that's entirely proprietary to the shop where they're working anyway.
Yeah, which is terrifying if you teach them just to click buttons, because as soon as those buttons change, all your understanding is gone, you're panicking, and you're not seeing the bigger pictures that are connecting all these different areas of VFX. So if you learn the general the general state of what is going on and truly understand how is the data moving through the software, then when the software version updates or you are asked to use another piece of software, you're just like, okay, I know what the data is doing. Where do I go for that? Okay, there, no problems. Bang. You end up, you can solve it, you can adapt. But yeah, if you click or if you learn to button click, that's a very dangerous way. As with everything, with you need to understand what you're doing.
Well, I think some of our listeners are going to go, this is battles with bits of rubber. How does this conversation apply to what we're doing or learning how to do
with bits of rubber?
Basically with bits of rubber.
Well, yeah, we did have a discussion this morning in our ZBrush talk about things like the IMM brush. You have those, you can slot in pre-made ears and noses and things.
Is it cheating, or is it just
Well, there were
working
two
smarter and not harder?
There were two different discussions. There was the one of like just the sheer ability to be able to kit bash stuff together like you would with model kits. You just take a bunch of pre-made kits, reconfigure them in a different way. The act of doing that is to some degree original, fair play. And if you've got to populate a large scene quickly, that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing something. But there's also from a creative point of view, if you've been raised on clay and you have sculpted things hardcore out of clay and there was no symmetry switch on there, you're so used to doing that it kind of removes something from it to have that.
It makes me
Right.
so mad.
Right. But we almost had like a kind of a therapy session.
We talked through it. We
talked through it.
We got to a good place this morning.
Yeah.
Well, basically, we're kind of like, did Michelangelo cheat by using hardened steel chisels to carve his marble? When he should have used his
fingernail.
Exactly. So at some point, it's Gordon Ramsay supposed to make his own saucepans before he starts cooking to call himself a chef.
Yeah.
So it's kind
really
of
interesting. Where's the line? Yeah,
So there is obviously the benefit and efficiency, certainly from production. If you're doing something for yourself, it's different from a production point of view. But also, we kind of reason that if you just kit bash stuff and you can't sculpt an ear, then that's different. That's like having music samples and then slinging them through GarageBand and calling yourself a musician. Whereas if you are a musician, you can take those things, and what it does is it starts you up here, but you're still going to do this much work.
Right.
Whereas before, when you did this much work,
It's
you were only getting to this point.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
Still
so
comes down
it
to
kind of
money.
expands you up.
At some point, time is money, and if you can use the cheats in ZBrush to knock out a half dozen examples of a makeup design to get production to sign off on, in the time it would take you to sculpt one, maybe two rough bits in clay, then
That's the thing, it's iterations, isn't it?
Production money, because you're being more efficient, you're working smarter, not harder. And then you're already in ZBrush, then you can lock in that approved design as your reference for doing the practical sculpt that winds up getting molded and cast and applied to an actor.
Sure. But we also figured out that there was something quite interesting in that people who are using ZBrush, and more people are doing so now sculpturally, and not even necessarily for film. Like, I don't think I'm going to be hired to design. I'm not a concept designer, but I like to sculpt. And so sculpting in ZBrush is useful because I don't need the physical space or the materials to block stuff out. I can iterate things, and then I can either use that as a design to sculpt something in clay, or I could print out a core of it, or I could print it out as a thing. And so now I'm starting to use digital language and understand digital ways of doing things in a practical sense, which is quite nice because it sort of helped bridge that gap. I always wondered how that gap would get bridged, and it seemed more like practical people are able to, because printers are not that expensive, and because ZBrush you've got ZBrush Core and ZBrush Core Mini, and even I can kind of sculpt something with it. So it's like, do you know what I mean? It's
Even the
accessible in a way
full-blown
like...
version of ZBrush
Yes.
is not as outrageously expensive as it has been.
It isn't, but if Phil Tippett was to crack open ZBrush, it's the same ZBrush that I'm using. Whereas before, 30, 40 years ago, you needed a rotoscope machine to do what they were doing at ILM. Whereas now, in some degree, you can kind of render something in a beautiful... Do you know what I mean? And so you're able to do that in a way that you couldn't do before. So you're now not the pressure, but there's opportunity to do things, and you can choose to do that yourself.
Yeah,
You
when
can
we
there
bought
are
Soft
tutorials for
Image
that.
years ago, before Maya was even out, and it only ran on Silicon Graphics.
Yeah.
Actually, it was when they had just ported it to PCs, and at that time, if you weren't working on an SGI machine, you didn't know shit, because it was like, SGI is the only way. Where's SGI today?
Yeah, exactly.
But that version of Soft Image cost us $15,000, and we fast realized we needed an engineering degree to run it.
Yeah.
Because it was the learning curve. You think the learning curve on on ZBrush now is difficult? I mean, we may as well have just set fire to the money or flushed it down the toilet. It was
Crazy
a
stuff.
very, very poor decision on our part.
What I think is happening now is the programmers, the designers of these tools are becoming more aware of the perspective of artists. So they are writing them for artists to use rather than I would love all these options, so I'm going to have endless tick boxes and drop-down menus and things that just confuse the hell out of everyone.
Exactly my problem.
Well, Pixelogic is a really interesting discussion itself, because there is a lot of software out there that established the standard way that 3D environments worked, and Pixelogic took it and threw it out the window, and they came
It's
up
the
with
Argos
a very...
thing, isn't it? It's kind of, Argos have said, this is how shops should work.
Yeah.
You keep all the shit in the back.
Yeah.
You fill in a little thing and bring it. So it's kind of, there's only Argos doing it this way.
But what's strange, you could be very good at Maya and lots of other software, come across to ZBrush and it just throws you completely. And that's actually one of the trouble that I have with the VFX students who feel very confident with software. They'll start with ZBrush and they'll actually get thrown because they're used to a template that it isn't following. Whereas a practical person that comes across to ZBrush and doesn't really know that much about other software might actually just accept it.
That's genuinely interesting. I mean, it gives me some cold comfort to know that everybody struggles with that, interface at first.
Everyone struggles.
We were talking
I'm
earlier,
kind of an After Effects junkie.
Okay,
And,
cool.
it's until ZBrush, it was my favorite software. Because there's virtually nothing you can't do in it.
Yeah.
And largely because it's got a very intuitive interface. It's like Photoshop
Plus time.
plus time.
Yeah.
It's very well done. Very
magical
deliberately
movement.
done.
Yeah.
With regards to the ZBrush, how long have you been using ZBrush in the visual effect, in the makeup effects and the
in
3D
SFX,
SFX? Yeah.
Personally and aggressively, I mean, I've been dabbling with ZBrush for about 2 years. When you first I was like, Rich, I need this in my life, and then we fell out a little bit. And like whenever I was fine as long as Rich was right next to me.
Then he left the room, things went right.
Very good. You're very good.
What have I done? It's like, oh, just click this.
Just click that.
So I mean, there was
Control and
Yeah, I only found out about that recently. There was like a barren period where I'd poke at it and get mad and like, but I think
And that's the barrier that I'm talking about. Like, it just isn't. It's sometimes a bit unintuitive, and there's so many ways that you can sort of break it. And now your model doesn't move, or now it's frozen, or now this, or now that. Like, so with our lectures when we start, it really is about just trying to get them comfortable in that environment, because if they can break through that barrier, there's so much positivity.
So there's definitely like a barrier that you pass through, and you're like, oh, it's almost
so
like...
your anger will go away at some point.
I've had some chats with Stu. I don't think he's ever going to not be angry at ZBrush. There are some things that
I
just
think
need
he's
to let go.
enjoying it.
There's just certain things that seem like they should be the way that I say they should be. Like, for example, if you have a selection of subtools, the subtool you have selected is not significantly different in contrast to let you know you've selected it.
I mean, there's a tiny little grey box around it.
Couldn't it just be like a different colour so that you can definitely see you've selected it? That doesn't seem like beyond the pale, that kind of thing. But that's the whinging of somebody that's not in love with it because they've been so distracted by all the other lovely things it can do.
Yeah,
I get
think
that.
Once you get past the kind of I can take a thing and make a thing, even if it's a simple thing. Now, I can smash out a bust in 3 hours, and I can manage my topology, and it's not terrible, and I can get it to ready to either 3D print or kind of move on to another process. And I'm okay at that. I love the program. Like I ran a session with my first years for the first 6 weeks of this module. We did a lot of ZBrush in there, and now I'm working with the second years. We're doing a trad sculpt, and I got there. I was like, all right, there's no mirror tool. I've got to sculpt both sides here, and I kind of got mad at the clay because ZBrush is so like you were saying before. The great thing about it is it's improved me as a sculptor so much in the last 12 months because I've done 3 times as many sculptures.
That is
like 3 times faster.
The absolute core of why we drove to have it taught at Bolton, because if you make something in clay, it can be wonderful, but say you've built the eye in slightly the wrong place, you are going to be attached to that eye emotionally. You don't want to change that, and that's a serious barrier to learning.
My students are afraid of. Because when we need to do big adjustments, I get my little prison
just get near it. I'm artistically, I don't consider myself particularly strong, but if I see something that's right, I will understand that it's right. But normally I need to see that it's wrong a number of times before I get to what's right. So me with clay is I find it very hard, but me with ZBrush, I look at it and go, it's wrong. Okay, so I've eliminated one way that this should be made. Move stuff around. No, that is also wrong.
Right, yeah.
I've eliminated another way. And you can do that very quickly in ZBrush until you lock down on, okay, now this is starting to feel how I want it to feel. And I think that's so important, especially as a student starting out in this field, that they have something where there isn't a fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, you can save your file, you can save a copy of your file, you can back your file up, you
ZBrush
can control Z.
aggressively auto-saves your files.
Yeah, you can control Z.
I had to just jump in here real quick. For listeners who are not English by birth, Z means Z.
Oh, sorry.
I have this fight with my wife all the time.
Sorry.
No, it's not. Don't apologize. It's more because I think it's funny.
Yeah.
But we had that chat about ZBrush this morning. We were saying like some of the cool things you could do is like you could quickly knock out sort of texture tools. You could print things that you might then mold in different materials because you know about molding and casting. Like for example, say you're doing a lizardy creature and you wanted the scales, you can make a series of stamp tools by sculpting or harvesting from nature or buying some tools, and then make like 5 or 6 different versions, print them all at the same time, cast them out in something like a hard PT Flex, semi-rigid PT Flex, and then make a stamp out of them that has enough give to it, and that would help you graduate. You know, that kind of thing you can actually practically bring in.
Use some of the skin texture brushes that are available, like the Carlos Gomez stuff, Pablander, that are really interesting. That to do practically with a sculpting tool would take forever. But if you can make take that texture brush and put it on a piece and 3D print that, then you've now got a physical tool that's going to allow you to get that exact same pore texture that you can now do in a practical sculpt quite rapidly.
Yeah.
And if the scale of the pores is slightly wrong, very quick to go back, scale up.
And if they're not intense enough, you can increase the intensity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've
Because
got,
you
lose-
talk about scale in ZBrush.
like, oh no,
Definitely not talk about scale in ZBrush.
there are ways that you can get to it and
It's getting
understand
better.
it.
They've got a
But-
3D print hub now,
Yeah.
where you can set the scale before you export. But other than that, I've exported stuff for jobs where I've sent it to a mate in CAD, just like, oh, have a quick look at this file for me. I'm going to chuck it into my slicer, and he's gone, mate, it's 18 meters across. I'm like, oh,
That's
supposed to be like a
ZBrush.
10 centimeter
Yeah.
gap.
The first thing we did.
I did one where I loaded it into 3D Builder, which comes natively with Windows machines, and the thing was like 5 millimeters. Again, it's totally textured, and I load it in there. It's like, where is it? I can't see.
When you drop it into your slicer for 3D printing, you're like,
Yeah.
does it not load? Oh,
No,
it's a tiny little
I've got a dead pixel. Oh, no.
That pixel on your screen is, oh, that's my model.
It's very strange, and I do think they'll catch up with it. I do think,
Because it's new, because you didn't have people making things digitally that were going to be within consumer level use. That's the thing. It's industrial, yes, but
when you're working alongside a package like Maya, which is so obviously scale, orientated, quite often your work with ZBrush is going from Maya, bouncing out to ZBrush, doing adjustments, sculpting, doing that, then bring it back into Maya. So often you're constantly in another package, which is giving you a very clear signal of scale. And I think therefore ZBrush just didn't emphasise scale. I don't really know why. It is there in the export options and things. You can make sure it's the right size and adjust it, but it's a bit of a faff. And you're probably going to get caught out by it a few times before you get it right. But
when you say a few times, you mean every time.
yeah. But I also, what I really think is amazingly positive about ZBrush is the quality of the mesh, how you have the topology of the mesh at the end of it isn't that important if you're going to 3D print and you're going to do that stuff. So some of the technical barriers that will stop our very artistic VFX students shining at VFX is that you have to have a ZBrush sculpt and then you have to set it up with a topology that will make sense for the rest of the VFX process. Whereas at that point, you don't really need to worry about it with practical
As
stuff.
long as it's not too heavy.
Yeah, as long as you're not going to kill your computer or your memory or something like that. And that, I think, therefore, there's a nice earlier jumping off point that actually enables it to connect to the practical field more smoothly with less technical knowledge being needed. And therefore, I think people should be making the most of it, if that makes sense, because that barrier and that sort of setup you have to have in ZBrush is less precise compared to if that asset was going to continue down a VFX pipeline, if that makes sense. So yeah, more people to get involved with it that way and use it that way, I think we're just going to see more and more exciting things come from it.
Now is a golden time for this kind of stuff, because we talked about this years ago when I was kind of training. I loved the visual effects stuff. I love making things in 3D because it's the power that some of these tools have. There's no restrictions. There's nothing to slow you down. Once you've got the interface, once you can speak that language, as a creative, there's nothing to slow you down. But I always missed holding the things. I'm a simple dude. I like to have tactile contact. If I've spent 100 hours making something, you can bet your ass I want to hold on to it.
I call it digital dust, like where effectively stuff that I produce, after a while it just feels just dust, just gone. It was there.
This is what's going to change things. I think is a lot of the things becoming available at a consumer level, like the scanners, like the Revu, whatever, the Revu 3, the Point, Revu Point,
Revo Pop.
Revo Pop.
We've got one on the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's it's about 500 quid, and it's like, I'm sure it's not going to be the most accurate scanner, but it's probably accurate for most things that we need to get your head around it.
Port texture, but the 15 grand won't give you the port texture.
But also, I guess if you have something that's that dense a scan, it's going to be a bigger file, right?
Yeah.
So when you're trying this out and playing with it, you probably don't want something too heavy because you're just trying to get the principle right. And once you've got the principle though, now you can work with denser meshes. It's kind of like learning to drive. You don't get given a McLaren F1 the second you pass your test when you're 17. That would be foolish. Do you know what I mean?
Try one out downstairs.
Try one out.
There is one.
There'll be a lot of upside down kits.
But it's completely usable. That's the thing. You could conceivably get that scanner.
But you don't need a scanner. You can do photogrammetry,
which I've been using.
You can take a photo of the same model from multiple angles with a normal DSLR, and there is software that will build that mesh.
Capturing reality is what I've been using.
Ideally, there's fantastic options out there. It's not as convenient as a scanner, but there are, and I think with a scanner you have a more intuitive access point where more people can just jump on that and do that. Where photogrammetry, you've now got off down quite a technical workflow where that might be a barrier. But it is incredible, as you say, what we are now able to do with stuff that can be sitting in your bedroom.
But that's where it's really going to change, isn't it? When consumers can buy this and do it, that's when we see this big explosion of people doing tutorials and showing you how to use this stuff, and then it'll become commonplace. I remember seeing the first time I'd seen a scan. I hadn't worked on it, but some friends were, and it was the on Fred Claus, I think. It's a Paul Giamatti body scan. It was, incredibly useful. You could see that it was a scan. It had none of the signature sort of distortions that you get, or the postures you have to hold for a body cast. And it was like, wow.
Well, you got to be careful there, because I've worked on a Netflix thing where this character has to effectively explode, and we're working with the digidouble, and the second that the actor knew that he was being scanned, and therefore the digidouble of the model on set as he's doing the performance is very different from the scan we've got.
So there's going to be an anti-sucking algorithm to correct that.
So we modeled it all, set it all up, and then said, right, here he is on set, let's line him up, and that is a different person.
So be a fragile ego algorithm that removes that, some kind of anti-distortion.
So, are any of the kids we have in here now part of the visual effects program, or is this all SFX and makeup effects?
I think it's a full-on invasion, isn't it? This is
makeup have been doing digital work.
Because I kind of like to
doing it for you.
Throw some questions out.
Get some opinions and get some questions going with you guys about your thoughts on what's happening at school and where you want to go professionally.
Who hates ZBrush and who loves ZBrush? Do you hate ZBrush?
With passion.
Because it's not sculpting. It's
anything. I don't get it. In my head, it doesn't make sense at all.
But clay is good. You work with clay and plastiline.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, but as soon as I get in front of the computer, the only thing I can do is probably search Google.
Right.
So is it just ZBrush, or is it computer software in general?
Mainly all of them. I can use Photoshop, but very limited
Yeah.
Photoshop skills.
But that can be a real barrier because there are people that are drawn towards practical stuff precisely because of the tactile nature of it. So to remove that aspect of it can be like, do you know what I mean? It's like most people that join, the paras probably don't mind being in aeroplanes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So as soon as you change that basic premise, it's kind of...
And you're always going to need a range. It's going to be fine to not be able to work with computers, if you get what I mean. There's always going to be jobs in the industry that are available for people who focus that way with their skill set. I don't think this is a sort of something that everybody has to be good at, otherwise you're going to somehow be a failure in the next generation of the industry. But it is a tool that we want everyone to be aware of, because other people are going to be working with it, even if you aren't yourself. And if you are working on it, it might give you a competitive edge, for a number of positions in industry, if a certain role comes in. So I think, to be honest, just to skew things off a tiny bit, and then we'll get back to the students, I program quite a lot of customized software for VFX. The 3 lecturers I work with can't write one line of code, but their suggestions are spot on because they've worked with me long enough to know what can be programmed and what can't be programmed. And equally here, even if you are not enjoying ZBrush, you're absorbing ZBrush, you're absorbing the experience of what people are doing with ZBrush, and therefore your suggestions will be compatible with people that could use a piece of software as a solution, if that makes sense. So you're not going to make uneducated or ignorant decisions about a workflow because you'll still have an awareness of what software can contribute to that.
And we
that
talked
workflow.
about this at Coventry, that being able to wear more hats well, even if it's the digital stuff's not what you want to do, being able to speak the same language as the people who do, there's going to be less chance of miscommunication
Absolutely.
through the production pipeline. And so you're going to be in a good position either way.
Yeah.
What about things like Procreate? Do you like drawing on a tablet or anything like that?
I can do that.
Do you enjoy that, though?
Yeah, I prefer it where you can probably draw more than the 3D software of it. I don't know, it's just...
Do you think it's the extra dimension that's throwing you off?
Yeah, I remember the Dynamesh and that stressed me out too much.
We'll hang out this week.
But on the other side, last week we had a special makeup student switch to VFX.
Right.
So they've come onto the course and they've enjoyed the
Seen the
VFX
lag.
side so much.
Dark side, Stuart.
But that's what we try and do. We try and offer an environment where people can follow their passion. Where if they do get drawn to the dark side or the digital side, they can go that way they want, and vice versa. And that's what I think we do very well. We give that opportunity.
Also, I think that's the best thing about what we do here. And no one does it like we do. Like Rich was saying before, that we were very unusual sort of upbringing that's brought us to this point. But I think this point is such a valuable experience for students. If one of my guys who we focus on creature, character, mech stuff, if they want to do something that has digital augmentation, a conversation with an expert is not even a department away. It's we cross over the road and go, hey Rich, what do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It
stops being that mystery thing. I've got no access to it.
And if a student does feel like, actually, I dig this digital stuff, it's a real simple thing to just make that step over to a program that focuses specifically on this. We have movement between our programs quite a lot because, I think at 18, 19, when students are applying for programs like this, nobody knows. It's such a kind of niche area in itself, and then we split that
And
into four
fast-moving,
niche
yeah.
areas. So
I love it.
You get students wanting to try to do both tracks at the same time.
We do get
Yeah.
them sit in
Yeah.
and lectures on the other side.
Yeah.
Generally, the courses are so intense that normally is short-lived by second and third year sort of thing. But it's wonderful to see
Blown
people
out.
try. Yeah, because it is. But my own experience in 3D printing, I wouldn't have made the decisions on the intergalactic project I made if Rick hadn't shown me the 3D printers and Jack hadn't talked me through the setup you guys had and Ed hadn't spent that time from makeup. So, I built up an awareness of the practical side just by the fact that we're in and around that, the same space. And I just love the way that information naturally, I literally came over, learnt about 3D printing, and then Rick and Jack were doing a few things, and they were like, okay, the mesh isn't quite working. I was like, oh, in ZBrush, you can just do that. And suddenly my knowledge fed back in and helped them. So it sort of just, it goes round in these sort of just wonderful circles where, as long as people don't bring any ego in, like, you all just accept what you're good at, accept what you're not good at, and learn from each other, and that's just the best environment. Like,
So something I thought was really interesting this morning when Todd was doing the ZBrush demo, was that we were all talking through a few things that annoyed me or that we weren't sure about. And we kind of talked about it as a group. And I think often when people play with ZBrush, they do so alone. And they'll do something until they meet this impenetrable wall, or they'll do something. And you don't know how to even ask the question. I don't know what words to use to ask the question. I think it would be useful to have something where you go through the process of making something. So somebody that sort of wants to use ZBrush but isn't very good at it does something and go, right here, and you have it on several monitors so everyone can see it. You go, can you see here that these are a quadrant, so these are triangles? Why is that different? And you could explain why. And do you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. And then you have like a kind of a group therapy session where you'd work through the little hiccups that do things.
It's exactly what we do.
That's what we do.
So we do a Microsoft...
Can I come and do the call?
We do a Microsoft Teams call from this computer out to everyone in the room. So everyone's got a Cintiq and everyone's got the call. Now, obviously, they can see the work on the screen, so why are you doing the call? The reason is you can share their screen up to the main screen. So when you got a call, you can say, if a student's got a problem, you go, do you mind sharing your screen? So they can click screen share, it pops up on the big screen, and then collaboratively we problem solve what that barrier that student has hit. And sometimes that'll be 10 seconds, or you've just missed that button. Sometimes it'll be a couple of minutes of discussion. But the important thing is that every student realizes that every other student is experiencing the same problems. Like, the same barriers, the same little hiccups.
It doesn't feel quite so private hell anymore.
You've got to just get that out in the open. Just get it out, get over it. Don't hit the dog on the way through. Because it's those sort of things where you'll beat yourself up over it. You'll go, I'm stuck on it again, or it's really frustrating. And if you're by yourself and you haven't got that support structure, that's when the software defeats you. And actually, you were just one tiny, tiny step away from success, but you didn't see it. Whereas if you bounce something like that up onto the screen, everyone gets to share it. Everyone learns from that misendeavor or way of doing things, and collectively we move forward. So that's the idea.
So that was part one. I think that was a worthy conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad we got enough content for 2 episodes.
Well, it was weird, wasn't it? Because we had this whole conversation, then we realised there was a whole bunch of other stuff we needed to talk about. So then we had a quick break, and then we just carried on, didn't we? And this was the same night that we were driving back, so it was going to be a long day. But it was just like, but this is too good an opportunity to miss. We're like, it was 30 of us in a room.
The energy was great. It was so much fun.
It was really cool, and it was nice to be in a room. I mean, the acoustics aren't great, but I've done what I can to bring the volumes up and all that kind of stuff, and make it good. But this is the whole point of this.
There was we had a lot of people.
We did have a lot of people, but the whole point of this podcast is to record these great, these conversations when and where we can. And this was important because we had all those students there and the tutors, and there were times where it was a very, very honest, kind of revealing conversation that, and tutors were saying things that students hadn't heard, and vice versa. And it was lovely. It was a really nice time. So, hopefully that'll be of value to people.
It was the kind of setting that I enjoyed when I was in school, because some of the best educational moments came outside of class.
Yeah.
When you can get your instructors and your tutors in a more casual setting, and just talk about the industry, and that's when these other things come out, because there's just so much to know, and it's impossible for it all to happen within a curriculum.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is the fact that the tutors stuck around and made this happen. They made space for us, and they found somewhere nice and big, and made sure everyone that wanted to come could. And they were trying to drum up as many people that wanted to come along, and they were doing that in their own time, after hours. I mean, they obviously care a great deal about that place and what they teach. And to sort of come undone like that and show that the people on the course, what they like, and it's like there's nothing hidden. What you see is what you get, and what you get is pretty good. So it was really cool. So I'm very happy we did that.
It's a great program, great people. I felt honored to be there for 2 days.
Yeah, man, it was cool.
It was a lot of fun. I hope we get to do that again.
Yeah, man.
Maybe next year. That would be great.
Cool. Right. So I guess I'm done. I can't think of anything else to waffle on about. My mouth is dry. It needs whiskey.
No, we can prattle on. Oh, Santa Claus is coming.
Is that the sound he makes?
Those were his jingle bells.
Jingle bells.
Jingle balls. Yeah, so if you've got any questions, you know where to find us, stuartandtodd@gmail.com, or leave us a voice message on the Battles with Bits of Rubber website. We love hearing from you.
We certainly do. Appreciate that, man. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. As always. We'll talk soon.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.